On today's show, we have a special crossover edition of Locked On Rangers and Locked On Giants for you with me, Bryce Patrick, host of Locked On Rangers, and Ben Kaspick, host of Locked On Giants, talking about Bruce Bochy, Carlos Rodon's free agency, all that and more on this episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on the Texas Rangers and the San Francisco Giants. I'm Bryce Patrick, host of the Locked On Rangers podcast, joined today by Ben Kaspick in a crossover episode. He is from Locked On Giants. We're here talking about Bruce Bochy, some other things going off in the offseason, and me trying to steal all the good players from Ben's team. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to, the official offseason getting going. Should be a fun one. Giants should be heavily involved. And, of course, the Bruce Bochy news is really interesting as well. So looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, as soon as this happened, I was like, I need to get Ben on the show because, it's like there's very quantifiable data about like what players are doing, what they do well, what they don't do well. Like you can kind of see it and you can watch like highlights or whatever. But with the manager, it's like you kind of have to talk to someone who has like seen and been there and like can remember like specific things, because other than like looking at their baseball reference page for like, all right, he won manager of the year 1 year. It doesn't even say what year he won. It's just like he's won manager of the year, which is super unhelpful. But he has won 3 World Series, including one in 2010 that I don't remember happening. For me, the entire baseball season stopped after the Rangers won the ALCS that year. That's why I have this ALCS pennant behind me, because after striking out Alex Rodriguez to go to the World Series, like everything after that is just gravy.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it pretty well, though. That was a long time ago now, but obviously the Rangers' history in those 2 years back to back was pretty rough. But from the Giants' perspective, there was the last time they had been in the World Series was almost as devastating as 2011 Rangers. Not quite, definitely not quite, but losing to the Angels. They had a 5-0 lead in a clinching game in the 7th inning, and they blew it, lost to the Angels, and then their next go at it was 2010. And so it's always like when you win, it's like elation, but you have to remember there is a fan base on the other side. And so I recognize that it's been a tough run for the Texas Rangers, kind of starting with that series.
Yeah, and for me, I always like kind of forget about the 2010 World Series because it's not as painful, and because of how like miserable 2011 was, like it's easy. Like I don't bear any ill will towards the Giants. Like more power to you. Like there was some even year BS. Like it was just like it was happening. Whatever. The Rangers were just happy to be there. You had 2 bad Cliff Lee games after he had been dominant all postseason. Like it's weird. It happens. Like it was just. And looking at some of those Giants teams, I'm still absolutely mind boggled that they won so many championships when it was literally just like their offense was just like Buster Posey, and like everybody got hot at just the right time, and they had some really great pitchers that were just fantastic at the right time. And to be honest, like I feel like a lot of the Rangers teams that were constructed in like both of our teams were really great from 2010 to 2016. And then one of our teams, I won't say which, has had good teams since then. Spoiler, it's not mine. But like, what are some of the things that you remember about Bruce Bochy as a manager that were that you think will bode well for this Rangers team in need of some leadership?
I mean, the number one thing, championships aside, is that he just was kind of beloved by, I mean, it ended up being everyone. If you win 3 World Series, the fans, he's just an absolute like legend in San Francisco. There's just no doubt about it. He may get a statue when all is said and done. I think he will get a statue at Oracle Park, given all that. But besides that, he's just so well liked and respected by the players. There's no drama on Bruce Bochy teams. He kind of wears it for his players. And he's not just kind of curmudgeon-y and one of these old kind of stuck in his ways managers either. He's just a very likable guy and a humble guy. Despite all the success, he never really made it about himself at all. and deflects kind of credit and pushes it onto the players. So he's like really, really a player's manager, but he's also, he's got a military background. He grew up like with a military father. And so, he's all about, I think he's got a chain of command kind of mentality. And so he's got, he's disciplined, but the players totally 100% respect him and love playing for him. And what really stands out about the actual managing was that when the postseason rolled around, he kind of just was as good as it gets for a while in terms of just managing the bullpen, when to leave guys in, when to take guys out. He just pretty much nailed it every time. There was one gripe I had in 2016, but at the time, the question is, like, the game has changed a lot, and so will he still be good at, I mean, because the game has changed a lot, and now a lot of managers act in a different way. And so the question is, like, is he going to just stay with what he was doing, or is he going to make some adjustments? But I don't know. I mean, he was just kind of the best of the traditional managers at the time. Like, there's a lot of these old school managers, right? And he was like the best of them in a lot of different ways, in my opinion, and nothing but great things to say about him.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at some of these bullpens, I mean, like they had, obviously Sergio Romo was fantastic. Obviously, you had the Beard, who was pretty excellent at times. But like other than that, there wasn't like a whole lot of just like, okay, this guy is just absolutely elite. It just seems like he really is that a strength that he really like knows his personnel like extremely well, the situations, and just like also that gut feel. Is that kind of what combined to that, you think?
100%. And when he was retiring, quote unquote, he said a couple times when he was being interviewed that he managed with his gut for 25 years or whatever it was that he managed. And so, yeah, I think in a lot of ways, he does kind of manage with his gut. And I'll point to the example of bringing in Madison Bumgarner in Game 7 in 2014 and just letting him go. He came in the fifth inning and he just kept pitching. He had pitched a complete game, 2 games prior, and he was on like 3 days of rest. And I think the plan was that he'll go a couple innings maybe, but he was rolling, and Bochy just said, "I'm riding my horse," and he just stuck with him. And he just kind of did that kind of thing. And so it was a feel thing. And also, this is one of the things where it's more of maybe an old school way of operating, but all of his bullpens ended up with like established roles, and you didn't have guys, who are like your closers coming in. Maybe in the bullpen, though, he made some exceptions, but during the regular season, you would have guys would end up in established roles based on inning. And it often worked out where you had your 6th, your 7th, your 8th, your 9th inning guys, and it became established. And I mean, part of it is personnel, right? They were able to get the job done, but also it was different names sometimes. And yeah, but ultimately the gut thing in the postseason, he would just change, like depending on what the situation was and what his feeling was, and it ended up being seemingly the right move. I mean, the proof was in the results, which was that they won the 3 World Series with teams that weren't considered the best any of those 3 years.
Yeah, the Rangers could definitely use some of that even year BS, as it's called, or well, maybe they could really use some odd year BS, because there's a lot of pressure on the Rangers to make at least the playoffs and end their drought since 2016 this year. And we're gonna get into a little bit more about Bruce Bochy and some roles and the exit that he left. But first, this episode is brought to y'all by Roan. I feel like there's a lot of pains when it comes to dress shirts. Like usually they're so uncomfortable, and you can never find the right size or whatever. It's always such a hassle to change them when you're trying to go through different activities. But the dress shirt was due for a radical reinvention, and Roan stepped up to the challenges. Roan's commuter shirt is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible shirt known to man, and here is why. Roan's comfortable 4-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy whatever life throws your way, from your commute to work to 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident with a wrinkle-free shirt without the hassle. With Roan's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the shirt. It's just that easy. The commuter shirt can get you through the workday straight into whatever comes next. Head to roan.com/lockedon. Use promo code LOCKEDON to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/lockedon and use code LOCKEDON to find your corner office comfort. Now, we are talking about Bruce Bochy, the bullpen whisperer, and he left, quote-unquote, retired. Now he's saying it's not really retirement. He was always going to come back. But I'm curious on your thoughts of how he exited in 2019. It seems like there was a new regime change. There was a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more analytical, and, that hasn't gone away from baseball. But it seems like having a former player in Chris Young as the general manager, the guy who might be dictating some of those things, do you think that might be a little easier for him to stomach?
I think absolutely. And the fact that he accepted the job tells me that, because he didn't need to take this job. Like he's done so much in this game. He was on his way to getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. I think this year, some committee was probably going to get him in this year. And so he didn't need to take this job. And the fact that he took it tells me he's super comfortable with what the situation is going to be there. And I'm confident, very confident, that he has a good relationship with Chris Young. That was evident just by watching a little bit of the press conference that I saw. I think there's huge mutual respect. And like I mentioned earlier with the chain of command, I think Bochy really, really, truly respects that as well. And so if he trusts the guy who's ahead of him. And I think that Chris Young, in the front office, that's a link up on the chain of command. And he wouldn't enter such a situation if he didn't feel comfortable with it. And I think that Chris Young strikes me as the type of GM who, especially that he knows Bochy as well as he does, who will give him that authority to kind of manage with his gut when he sees fit. And so to me, it's like a perfect match. And just the simple fact, as soon as I saw that he had accepted the job, it told me 100% that both sides are really comfortable with the way the operation is going to be run.
Yeah, and I think that definitely provided some encouragement to me because, and I think you're right, because Chris Young is a very young GM. I mean, I don't think anybody expected him to be in this role. He was obviously pretty much handpicked as soon as he came in as the GM, and John Daniels was the president of baseball operations since I think 2006. It had been a long time that he had been here, and it was kind of obvious that he was the heir apparent to John Daniels, but just no one really thought that he was going to be fired mid-season like it went down. And so having, I think, a guy who has got that gravitas and the, years and years of experience, literally 25 years of managing, that in those postseason moments, he would definitely go and, let him go do his thing. And I think one of the other things that Bochy talked about is why he picked this place is because it seemed like they had a real clear vision and a commitment to winning, and a commitment that comes from ownership. The Rangers were very active in free agency last year, and they're going to have to be again this year, especially on some of the top pitchers in the market. One of those top pitchers is a guy named Carlos Rodón. He has a player option for next year, if I'm remembering his contract correctly, but it seems pretty clear that he is going to opt out, and I know that the Rangers are now linked to throwing a lot of cash at Carlos Rodón. Do you think that he is likely to stay in San Francisco? They were obviously just linked to Aaron Judge, so is that you think something you think will kind of fall under the radar when you're throwing all the horses at Aaron Judge?
Yeah, so the thing about Rodón, he does have the option to come back next year for $22.5 million, but given the season he just had and the season he had the year prior, it's an absolute foregone conclusion he's going to turn that down and re-enter the market. And in terms of the Giants bringing him back, there's obviously interest from the Giants given he performed like a true top of the rotation arm this year. And the fact is, though, that this front office that I mentioned earlier, that is kind of, more analytically inclined, if you will, they have shied away. It seems that there's a real tendency to shy away from giving multi-year, specifically 5-year plus deals for starting pitchers. And I can point to last year with Kevin Gausman as the perfect example of this. Kevin Gausman was really good with the San Francisco Giants. He wanted to come back. He said he wanted to come back. He was like best friends with Logan Webb, a homegrown stud pitcher for the Giants. And yet Kevin Gausman ends up signing with the Blue Jays. It wasn't like it was a crazy overpay or anything. It was like a reasonable deal in line with what was expected of him. And he ultimately went on to say that the Giants never made him an offer. And so it was pretty shocking to hear that. But my kind of interpretation, because, they did bring in Rodón for the exact same average annual value, $22.5 million. But and Gausman got $22.5 million per year, but over 5 years. And for Rodón, it was a 2-year guarantee if Rodón opted in, and at least 1 year, obviously. So they prefer seemingly shorter term deals for pitchers. There are some guys out there who are probably going to be able to be signed for shorter term deals, like Jacob deGrom, Clayton Kershaw, and Justin Verlander. And so I would not be shocked if they let Rodón go get his 5-year deal somewhere else, and maybe they pivot to these guys who you can sign for 2 or 3 or even 1 year, like they did with Rodón himself after letting Gausman leave.
Yeah, this was really a precipitous drop off by the Giants. I mean, from last year, there was a fantastic season that I feel like not enough people appreciated. Even I was, I think even the postseason, I was way too skeptical of this Giants team that was like legitimately good. I mean, everything kind of fell back down to earth, but I just kept seeing so many of these, like their offense, which was admittedly fantastic, like the best in baseball last year. But I was just like, I don't know. There's like so many of these guys who, like, I just don't trust to like repeat any of this. I mean, like Evan Longoria out of nowhere having just like a complete renaissance, like Brandon Crawford having one of his best offensive seasons ever. Same with Brandon Belt being like absolutely amazing offensively. I was like, I don't trust this. And, I think part of that might have been the fantasticness of the hitting coach that was there that was absolutely stolen by the Rangers. Do you think part of the offense kind of coming back to earth was the Rangers stealing the fantastic hitting coach whose name is escaping me at this exact moment?
Yeah, Donnie Ecker. He was popular here for the short time he was here because the Giants in Bochy's last year actually were quite bad. And then in the short COVID season, their offense dramatically got better. And this was the first season under this new coaching regime that took over, because the front office, like I said, was a year prior. Then Bochy left, and it was new manager and new coaching staff, completely new staff. And Donnie Ecker was one of those guys. And they actually had 3 hitting coaches, including Ecker. And I think Ecker was kind of considered the main one. And he left for the Texas Rangers, and it was a blow. And I mean, it was an interesting job that he ended up getting there, bench coach and offensive coordinator. Not a very typical title that you see, but I think it took that to lure him away from. I think he's from the Bay Area as well, and so obviously he was attracted to that opportunity. But I don't know how much the Giants regressing had to do with that, but it's certainly something we have talked about on my show as a possibility, as one of the numerous reasons that they simply had a much worse year this year than they did in 2021.
Yeah, the Rangers really took a huge step forward offensively. Part of that was, signing 2 of the best offensive players at their positions. That really helps because there was not a whole lot going offensively for this team last year. But, I mean, there were some really great offensive strides made by Adolis Garcia, who was kind of felt like a flash in the pan last year, was great in the first half, and just absolutely pretty terrible in the second half. Nathaniel Lowe took a huge step forward from, like, he's fine last year to like, wow, he is a really stinking good hitter. And after a just craterous first 2 months of the season, Marcus Semien really rebounded and looked like himself, and some other big seasons like Jonah Heim and whatever. But that was just a really great hire, and I'm very glad the Rangers could steal him away. And I'm hoping that he ends up staying on the staff. But there are going to be some changes in pitching coaches, and it seems like one of the things that the old skipper is really great at is finding a great pitching coach. Is the pitching coach who was there when Bochy was there, are any of them still there, or was that just a complete coaching regime shift when the new skipper took over? It
was a complete change. And for the pitching coach under Bochy, Dave Righetti was a long-time pitching coach here. And in I can't remember exactly what year, but a few years before Bochy left, Dave Righetti also kind of was reassigned from being the pitching coach. He moved to a advisory role with the front office. So there was kind of some turnover because the Giants, I mean, they really went backwards a little bit in the last few years that Bochy was there. 2017, they lost 98 games. 2018, I think they lost 90 something games, but in the lower 90s. And in 2019, they were, below 500 as well. And so in those years, you started to see, I think maybe from above, in an effort to kind of modernize a little bit, they kind of pushed out some of these more old school coaches and tried to infuse some of what was going on in the league with the coaches that were teaching more modern philosophies. They tried to kind of push some of those guys into the coaching staff, and it ultimately, I think they kind of concluded we need to completely tear this thing down a little bit from a organizational structure philosophy perspective, and that was part of moving on from Bochy. And so that's ultimately something I'm very interested to see, is like, who are the coaches that he elects to put around himself? Does he keep Donnie Ecker in that role? And from my understanding is that that Ecker is expected to come back, and a lot of the guys are expected to come back. And I think that's part of Bochy, is that he's humble enough to he's not just like, it's my way or the highway. I think he understands that the game has changed, but he's not going to fully abandon who he is, but he's also like humble and open-minded enough to understand that sometimes these things are necessary and that the game has changed. So I'm really fascinated to see who ends up rounding out that staff.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the Donnie Ecker hire, and I think he's probably going to stick around. The main one that I was really personally concerned about is Tony Beasley, who was the interim skipper, had never been a skipper for the last 20 years, was a longtime minor league manager, but that was a long time ago. He was a third base coach. Just absolutely lovely human being, beloved throughout the organization. I don't know if you remember the Apple TV game that Martin Perez had in Houston, was literally my favorite Rangers game of the season. He went, and this was Beasley had cancer for a few years, and he had his final visit with his cancer doctor in Houston before that game and was officially declared cancer-free. And Martin was like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go throw a freaking shutout for you. And that's exactly what he did. And it was just, so lovely. And such a beautiful moment. But, there was a little bit of a regression offensively for this Giants team, but one guy who did not regress offensively for the Giants was Jock Peterson. Now, he had a fantastic season, and he's a guy who the Rangers don't have a whole lot of need offensively. Their only, real question mark is maybe a short-term fix in left field. Do you think that Jock Peterson is going to be back in San Francisco next year, or do you think that they're going to let him walk?
It's a good question, and one that we're, wondering about ourselves over here. He did grow up a Giants fan. He's from the area, and so this was a homecoming this year, coming to the Giants. But he is a guy who loves to just have fun on the field, playing the game. And what we learned at the end of the season is that more than anything, he wants to go to the playoffs. And so that would be my hesitation to when we talk about the Rangers. While I think people in the industry and we know and expect that the Rangers are on an upward trajectory, I would say. And he might not know that. That's the thing. The players aren't always really... He knows, obviously, his friend. I'm sure Corey Seager is there now. I'm sure he knows Marcus Semien. So those moves definitely speak volumes about the direction that this team is trying to go. But he also was really, really unhappy with the fact that the Giants missed the playoffs. He said that's all he wants is a chance to go to the postseason. And that, even for the Giants, who had a 107-win season in 2021, it made it sound like, the way he said it, that he may not want to come back here because the team is not an obvious lock to go to the playoffs. And so that would be my one hesitation for both of our teams, is does he view them as immediate contenders?
Yeah, and that is definitely going to be a big question. I'm expecting hopefully a big increase in wins from both these squads. Clearly both very well run in different places and now have some even more ties than they did before. But this was a lot of fun talking with you, talking about Bruce Bochy. I am so excited to have a future Hall of Fame manager who might be able to get the Rangers over that hump in those cursed playoffs that they have just never, ever been able to stop tripping over themselves during. But really enjoyed talking with you. Ben, where can the fine folks listening to Locked On Rangers find you and all your work?
On Twitter probably is the best place, where there's a link tree sending out to all the stuff, and the Twitter handle is @BenKaspick, KASPICK. And for my listeners, where can they find you?
They can find me at Bryce Patrick. That's Bryce with an I, Patrick with no C on Twitter. You can find my work at Locked On Rangers. We got the actual at Locked On Rangers before that other as a team with another as a team with who also shares a name with another professional team in a New York market. I know you can understand the struggles there. But yeah, go find us there on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure. Best of luck to your team in the offseason. I hope that we get to steal Carlos Rodón from you, but that you don't mind because you get something else even better. And maybe, just maybe, we can see these teams face off together or face off against each other in another World Series, and it won't be another 12 years until we see that. But thank you so much for listening to Locked On Rangers and Locked On Giants. That's going to do it for this edition. Until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.